From KUNC and the NPR network, this is In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. A year ago last summer, a young bicyclist named Magnus White was struck and killed by a driver on Highway 119 near Boulder. A memorial ride for Magnus earlier this month drew more than 2,000 participants. And his parents spoke to the crowd and called for measures that would make roads safer for cyclists, including better bike lanes and stiffer penalties for careless driving.
By coming here today, you are sending a message to our legislators and to Americans around the country. We are all here as a new voice for change.
They also called for a more unusual measure, a federal requirement that all new vehicles be equipped by the year 2029 with automatic emergency braking systems that can sense bicycles. Say your car drifts into the shoulder where a bicyclist is riding, the car would automatically brake or be nudged back into its lane. So that got us wondering, how would that technology work? And how feasible is it? For answers, we reached out to Brian Reimer with the Center for Transportation and Logistics at MIT. He researches automatic braking systems and other advanced vehicle technologies. Brian is a cyclist himself, and he said he often experiences moments where this technology could make a difference.
Unfortunately, in the thousands of miles that I've ridden, I've had too many calls where cars seem to swerve to the right and into the lane of travel, or even more frequently, move through stop signs and stop lights in front of you. So I am very attuned to the sensitivities and needs for infrastructure and technology improvements that can help them make the roads safer for cyclists, and would be delighted to be free from some of the burden and risks of cycling.
Well, let's get into that. For those who aren't familiar, what is automatic emergency braking and how does it work?
Automatic emergency braking is a newer technology in terms of automatically sensing the potential of a threat in front of the vehicle, either using vision systems, cameras, or vision and radar systems, or just radar. Mm-hmm. And then processing that information at very high speed and helping the car to automatically apply the brakes to try to mitigate the risk of collision. And this technology has been advanced over the last several decades, really on top of what many of us have experienced in what's called forward collision alerts or forward collision warnings, which are just an auditory warning to the driver that something may be going wrong. It's really leveraging automation and AI to help augment human decisions and improve safety.
And you mentioned the research has been going on for decades. There are certainly plenty of newer car models that have this technology. How effective is it at preventing crashes?
Actually, Erin, almost 90% of the cars sold in America today have some form of AEB equipped with them today. And AEB is quite effective at preventing rear-end collisions when you have a large vehicle in front of you, car, truck, etc. Okay. It's a little more difficult when it becomes pedestrians or cyclists. And part of that is the limitations of sensing and the speed at which the computation needs to make decisions. So when we have a big object in front of us, cameras and radars can do a really fairly reasonable job at picking up that object, tracking that object, and helping the car make what in essence is a decision that's going to affect both the driver as well as all the surrounding vehicles in fractions of seconds. But cyclists in particular are a little more difficult. They move a lot faster than pedestrians. Cyclists don't follow linear trajectories in quite the same ways as cars do. They move around and wiggle a lot, which is kind of how a bike works, which makes it just harder to track that information at high speed. It will come. It's just not here yet. And I think it's really key that if we want to see these types of systems on vehicles, and I, for one, absolutely do, we begin to invest more in the R&D side of improving the sensing systems capabilities of deterring and detecting bicyclists and tuning these systems to that type of situation.
It sounds like the technology for this isn't quite where we want it yet, but it seems like something automakers or developers should be working on urgently. I mean, hundreds of cyclists die every year or are injured. Many more are injured after being hit. Is there a case to be made for automakers to say, okay, let's not wait for the perfect technology, let's go with good enough, and then we can improve it later?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Erin. We need to be pretty sure we're doing the right things right now, and we need to be improving the technology for all aspects of vehicles, motorcycles, cyclists, and all the way over to pedestrians. And the biggest risk factor right now is actually pedestrian collisions and people walking across the road, perhaps a little more distracted than they used to be, perhaps not as situationally aware as you were, and drivers being the same. So we need to really improve the technology across the board. And while various stakeholder groups may want to push for one avenue or another, the safety data would be arguing right now it's pedestrians. And that's where the investments mean the most right now.
I mean, it just kind of makes me wonder, too, if putting so much faith in technology is the right approach to this problem, because your research seems to find too many bells and whistles, causes people to get overly reliant on the tech.
Yeah, and that's, and we don't want to become over-reliant on the tech. We just can't assume that the car is going to stop for everything out there, and we need to begin to incorporate into driver training more understanding of what automation can do and what its role is in supporting us. And it's a great way of last minute dealing with situations that we as humans probably should try to avoid or never let occur in the first place.
As our conversation continued, we turned from the nuts and bolts of the technology to how government might be able to encourage tech that makes cyclists safer. We touched on how NHTSA, or the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, views these questions, and how a different technology called V2X, or Vehicle to Everything, may be especially promising for folks who care about cycling safety.
In the most recent rulemaking around AEB that came from NHTSA in May, they called out specifically the fact that they did not feel this technology was ready for motorcyclists and cyclists yet. And cyclists in particular, being an avid one myself, are just a little harder than pedestrians and vehicles to detect, which means that from a computational perspective, it requires more tuning, more insight, and more modeling than exists today.
Brian, there's a different technology that would see bicyclists wearing electronic beacons that could send a signal to a car that gets too close to them. The driver would hear an alert. How plausible is that technology in the near future?
Extremely. There was an announcement out of US DOT on Friday talking about embracing finally of V2X technology. So with a beacon of some sort, you're coming over a hill, the car can be aware that there is a cyclist over that tip of the hill. It may not have perfect triangulation information of where that cyclist is in space, limitations of GPS. But at the end of the day, when you combine the V2X technology with the onboard sensing, you have another level of redundancy and reliability in your decision pathways. So the beacon concept is alive and well. It is probably another area that should have been invested in a decade ago, but by golly, on Friday, we seem to have made some big headway in DC.
That sounds like a very promising development. Dr. Brian Reimer, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Erin, great to be here.
And if you want to learn more about some of this new technology, we'll drop some links in our show notes and at KUNC.org. That's it for us today on In The NoCo. I'm Erin O'Toole. Thanks so much for listening.